In this lesson, we'll cover the topic of strategy. How does your company deploy its scarce resources to gain a sustainable advantage over the competition? Determining competitive position. Now, in strategic planning, the traditional approach to determining strategy is to begin by doing a SWOT analysis. And you're probably familiar with this. SWOT stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And the thinking is that if you can figure out what you're good at, you can maximize on that. If you can figure out what you're weak on, you can strengthen that. You can look at the opportunities in the markets, and you can look at the threats in the markets. And it's typically a chart with 4 squares in it, and you list each of those in there, and voila, you've done your SWOT analysis. You look at what opportunities are out there, etc. So the pros of this approach is it's relatively easy. You don't need much data, and it's time tested. The cons are that it's not very useful in coming up with specific strategic areas for change or investment. And so our authors advocate a different approach, which is similar, but it allows you to identify specific segments, business segments that you want to focus on, which you feel like you have strategic competitive advantage in the market on. And so there's a couple of terms there that you need to be familiar with in order to use this approach. And those are customer purchasing criteria and key performance criteria. Okay, so there's 2 criteria that you need to determine. Now let's talk about each of these real quickly. The customer purchasing criteria are the things that the customer feels are important from the product. And key performance criteria are things that you need to do in order to satisfy those customer needs. We'll take a look at those more in depth in just a bit here. And so the approach is to identify and weight those, and then assess your competitive position based on those criteria. And so if you look at the appendix of our textbooks, Evans and Tracy, you'll see a good explanation, an in-depth explanation, and I encourage you to read that and really understand that to be able to get this concept down. So what is your strategy? And again, by the definition of strategy, meaning using your resources in order to gain sustainable advantage. Now, you may be familiar with Michael Porter's generic strategies approach. He posits that there's essentially several different approaches that companies take in terms of their strategy. One is low cost. We're the low cost leader. Think of, Walmart, for example, right? I mean, they're all about low prices. There's a lot of retail out there that position themselves as being the low-cost leader. Differentiation. We're different than everybody else. Think, Apple Computer. In fact, they even had a famous ad campaign many years ago, think different, right? Or think differently. People chided them because the grammar wasn't even correct, but it was think different. And then there's focus. Who is your particular market segment that you're going to focus on? Is it going to be on people that have more money, more affluent? So maybe your product is like a Rolex watch, and so you're not going after the Walmart crowd, right? You're going after people with means, people who can afford a nice luxury product like that. And so Rolex doesn't come out with cheap watches that they sell at Kmart. You're only going to see them in nicer jewelry stores and such. Okay, so those are sort of some of the generic strategies that have been with us for a while in terms of helping you identify what is your approach in the marketplace. And again, you guys, I believe, have taken marketing. You should be pretty familiar with this strategic approach. Now, let's talk about strengthening competitive position. So the first thing you need to do is to determine the customer purchasing criteria and the key success factors, and how you compare to your competition. Then determine which to focus on, which products and services to enhance, to add, and to drop. Okay, so here's a list of 6 customer purchasing criteria, and you'll see that the CPCs and the KSFs are really the same thing, but they're looked at from a different point of view. Okay, so the customer purchasing criteria is what's important to them, and the key success factors are what's important to you and to your business, what you need to do in order to satisfy those customer needs. So generally speaking, they are things like effectiveness. How good is your product? How well does it work? Efficiency. Does the product help them to be better? Is your company more efficient in delivering goods and services? And I think of a company like Amazon. They're probably one of the most efficient businesses around right now. You can go on, and if you order something early enough in the morning, it'll be there by the time you get home, for dinner. So that's efficiency, right? Is your competitive position based upon your efficiency and to really meet customers' need for timeliness. Relationship. Do you have a good relationship with your customers? And if I think of Amazon, do I think about a good relationship? Well, not really. I don't know anybody at Amazon. I really, it's a very nameless, faceless kind of an organization. But I think of, for example, the guy who cuts my hair. Is he very efficient? Well, maybe not. But do I have a good relationship with him? Sure. Okay, so there's an example of how relationship is important in your strategic competitive position. A range of products or services, right? Again, Amazon has everything. Now, but they might not have a full range of things that are a little more boutique-y. So say, for example, you're into fly fishing, right? You might go on there, well, they might not have a whole lot of things related to fly fishing, but I'll bet you there's websites out there that have tons and tons of detailed little bits and bobs and different colored thread and different colored feathers and, all the arcane things that you need to be a good fly fisherman, right? Okay, so what is your range of products or services? The premises. Now, this is mostly for service businesses, for retail, right? What does the place look like? We've all had experiences going into places, and just our first impression was, man, this place is kind of dumpy. I don't think I want to go back here. This is kind of creepy. It's not very warm. It's not freshly painted. And then other experiences where you go in and say, man, this place is like a palace. I like being here. I feel good here, right? So businesses invest in the premises as part of a strategic competitive positioning. They know if they do that, they're going to set themselves apart from the competitor. The guy down the street that's got the dumpy place, if they have a nice place, it's well lit and nice artwork and whatever, people are going to prefer to go there. And then, of course, we can't leave out price, right? Now, this is a tricky one, right? Everybody wants low price, but a price can also be used to, as part of your differentiation strategy. For example, think about Apple Computer. Well, everybody knows that Apple products are significantly more than others, but people are willing to pay for them. It's considered a premium, right? So you price yourself higher than your competitors because by doing so, you set yourself off as a premium brand. You're a luxury brand. So that strategy does work for a lot of businesses. Now, here's a chart that shows some of these customer purchasing criteria and key success factors. And as I mentioned, these are really the same things, but they're viewed from a different perspective. So you'll see in the first column there, and this is an example from a spa service. Okay, so this is the running example that the book has been using. So you'll see the criteria there: effectiveness, efficiency, relationship, etc. And then the first column there shows the customer purchasing criteria. So this is what they want. So for example, look at relationship, rapport, and enthusiasm. Okay, so people want to have a good relationship with this spa guy, right? So you're going in and you're getting your hair done or you're getting a massage or whatever. you want a good relationship with that person. You don't want to go in and kind of feel the cold shoulder or feel like this person doesn't, care about you, right? You want people that are upbeat and enthusiastic and those sorts of things. Okay, so if that's what the customer wants, if that's going to give, in their minds, make you competitive compared to another, place, what is it that you need to do? So if you look over at the column on the right there, those are the associated key success factors. Okay, so you'll see there people skills, communication, and positive upbeat culture, right? So if you believe that having a good relationship with your customer is important, then you need to have people who have good people skills, and you need to provide a culture that's positive and upbeat, right? Because that's what gets your people motivated and interested in engaging the customers, right? So if you're beating down your people and if you've kind of got a gloomy, down kind of culture, well, guess what? Your therapists and your hair cutting people and everything, they're not going to have a very good rapport. They're not going to be very enthusiastic. It all starts from the top. It all starts from the culture. So you see how those align then there. So the people want the good relationship, the rapport, the enthusiastic personnel. You, as the business owner, the success factor for you is to develop people skills and to provide that sort of upbeat culture. So you see how that works? Now the other columns there, importance and change. The importance is how important is that in your business, right? So for example, that enthusiasm, it's like that's a pretty important thing. Nobody wants to go to a salon where nobody's enthusiastic. They don't care about being there. So that means that's something that you need to continue to grow and to develop in order to develop your competitive position in that particular one. So strengthening competitive position, a strategic position rather. Okay, so what do you do? So you've looked at all these factors, what's important to the customer, what are the skills, the things that you need to develop, and you do what's called a portfolio analysis. You identify how competitive you are in the markets ranked by order of attractiveness. Okay, now what is an attractive market? An attractive market is one that's based on the size, growth, competitive intensity, and market risk. Okay, so for example, if a market is, if it's small, okay, this is the size, right? It's small, there's less room for a new entrant, right? If the market is big, well, there's plenty of room. All right, so think about, the example we just looked at, spa services. There's a lot of people out there that like to get their hair cut, that like to get the manicures and the mani-pedis and all that kind of stuff, right? So it's a pretty big market. There's other things that are a bit more niche-y, so go back to my example about fly fishing, right? Is that a big market? I want to become I want to start selling supplies for fly fishermen. Well, it's pretty niche-y, not everybody likes that. You've got to be out in a rural area where there's rivers and lakes and all that kind of stuff. Okay, so you look at how big the potential market is. Is it growing? What's the competitive intensity like, right? How many people are already in this market? Is there like, a million people? Think, for example, this whole spa one. I like that. Look around your city, drive around. How many spas are there? How many haircutting places are there? You might see a new upcoming development somewhere and say, man, this place really has room for a new entrant into the market. So you might say, yeah, it's not very intense here. The competition isn't very intense. That makes it an attractive market. All right. So you determine how competitive you are in your business segments. You look at the attractiveness of the market, and then this leads to your strategic position, which is the balance of competitiveness across all segments of varying degrees of attractiveness. Now, here is an example. Here's a chart that shows you how you can visualize, how you can lay out this strategic position. So what you see here on the x-axis is segment attractiveness, and then on the y-axis is competitive position. So what you do, so each of those bubbles represents a different segment. And remember we said a business segment is one product to one customer. So if you got two products and you have two prospective customer groups, right, say business to business or directly to the end user, that would be 2 customers. All right, so 2 products to 2 customers. So that's 4 business segments, right? 2 times 2 is 4. So you've got 4 business segments there. So these bubbles each represent a different segment, and then what you do is you place it on there in terms of whether it's strong strategic position or weak strategic position. So if you look, for example, at the bottom left, okay, you don't have a very good competitive position. All right, so you did that analysis and you realize, man, we're not really that good at that. And then you look at the segment attractiveness. In other words, how poised is the market to receive a product like that? It's not very strong either, right? So go back to the fly fisherman. All right, so you look at all your products and you look at your rods and reels and say, man, we don't really have a very good rod and reel line. You look at the market and say, it's not a very big market. It's very niche-y. There's already a lot of other players in there. So your position is relatively weak in that. So do you really want to invest a lot in that segment? So, according to this chart here, the answer might be no. You might want to exit. There's not a good market. It's not a very strong product in your portfolio. You might just want to get rid of it. All right. So this chart here shows you how you can think about your different big business segments, relate them to the market attractiveness, and determine if that's something that you feel is strategically important, that you can get competitive advantage within the marketplace. All right, so how does all this stuff relate to a startup business, right? Well, essentially it's going to be the same as an established business, except your competitive position is in the future, right? So you don't really have a track record to speak of. So you will have a low rating in the key success factors. You can't really talk about how you've done compared to your competitors. You can't really talk about market share and things like that. It needs to be defensible to convince the backers, right? So you're trying to come up with something that's plausible, that's reasonable, that based on your best research of where your product, of what the market is like, how good you feel like you can do with that product and be competitive, right? That's how it becomes defensible to your backers. And then based on a judgment of the future, right? So none of us know the future, and your backers know that as well, but you have to do your best judgment. You do your best to determine what the future might be like in any particular market. And as all of our sections have ended now, you'll notice this trend here. We want to think about the strategic risks and opportunities associated with this, right? So in terms of your strategy, you want to ask the questions: what are the risks that your competitive positioning could turn out to be worse than anticipated, and what could happen to significantly improve your competitive prospects, right? So those are your risks and opportunities, and how likely are these to happen? So for example, a competitor takes a major customer away from you, so that's a risk, right? So you enter the market, you think you've got a great position, you've got a great product, and boom, somebody comes along, they've got a better position, a better product, and they start to eat your lunch, right? So that's a risk, right? That's always a potential. What's an opportunity? Well, maybe one of your competitors actually leaves the market and says adios, they fold up, they're tired of doing business, and now you've got all these prospective new customers in the market for you, right? So that's an opportunity. All right, so I hope this has been helpful. I really like this approach to strategic thinking. I believe it's much more thorough and bankable than the SWOT analysis, and I think if you incorporate this approach into your business plan, the likelihood of achieving successful results and getting the buy-in and the backing that you need, it's much more likely. Anyhow, thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you guys later.